President, comrades, Bob Crow, National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers, moving this resolution. And can I put a few ghosts to bed, if you don't mind me using that expression? Because I've heard comments around the place that, regarding the RMT's resolution on this agenda, is that we're going down the same agenda as the right-wing press, the right-wing parties, and also as far as the extreme right-wing parties, like the British National Party and the English Defence League. Let's make it quite clear. We, the RMT, this body, are internationalists. We've gone right through this morning's debate with Guy Ryder, having the pleasure to be speaking at this conference, talking about international rights. We hold our hands up to all workers around the world. But brothers and sisters, people better start recognising the facts about this European Union. The European Union was opposed by this body right the way through the piece to Jacques Delors come and gave a speech to this body. If you remember when Jacques Delors come over, and by the way, people should get Jack Jones's book, the great former leader of the Transport and General Workers Union, who explains the reasons why that the Transport Workers Union at that time opposed the European Union. When Jacques Delors turned up here at this body, and the TUC completely switched its policy, he said that we are all now partners. There's not such thing as struggle anymore with the bosses. I was here as a delegate, and the very next day I met the chief executive of London Underground at a meeting. His name was Derek Smith. And when he opened the meeting up to tell us about how much he was going to cut, I said to him, "Excuse me, chief executive, can we have an extra 2 weeks holiday, an extra 50% increase on pensions, and also increase on sick pay?" He said, "Have you gone mad, Bob?" I said, "No, I've just been told now by the European Commissioner we're all partners, so surely we can all decide." And people thought that they could just get out of bed one morning and their struggle was over. The reality is, I've heard other people say, that if we carry out a policy of a referendum, then we'd be lining up with the British National Party. Well, the reality is, brothers and sisters, we should be deciding what the agenda is of working men and working women, and not allowing the BNP and the right-wing parties to pick the middle road up. That's what we should be standing for. The BNP's also got a policy on renationalising the railways. So can't we discuss renationalising the railways? What we're talking about here is that we are not opposed to European working class men and women. We are opposed to the concept of the bureaucracy of the European Union. And that European Union, brothers and sisters, is an animal that drives privatisation. It's an animal that smashes up the welfare state. We have to recognise the fact that after the war, concessions were given to people in Europe because they was worried that the Soviet Union's concepts of life would spread amongst the rest of Europe. So better pay and better conditions was given. Now that the Soviet Union's gone, they're going to take all of those things that we naturally thought was for granted. That's why you can't have a nationalised industry under a European Union. You can't have a monopoly, a public sector monopoly. They don't mind having private sector monopolies, but they don't want public sector monopolies. And the reality is this, brothers and sisters, we're not wrapped up with the Queen and wrapped up with the Union Jack. Far from it. Someone said to me, "All you want to do, Bob, is keep the Queen's head on the £10 note." I couldn't care less with the Queen's head or the Queen's arse is on the £10 note. I'm not really concerned about how much money I'm being paid. You can pay me in shekels, you can pay me in euros. But I've got to tell you, brothers and sisters, it's a democratic position. I will elect my MP on the basis of what he or she's going to do for me at the workplace and in the community. And you're taking the powers away by handing them over, not to the European Parliament, but you're handing them over to unelected bureaucrats, and you're handing them over to people who are now want to take our rights away from us. The reality is this, brothers and sisters, we should have the right for a referendum, and we should be turning around and saying that if our fiscal policy is being taken away from us, and there's no longer a currency that is our own currency if we enter the euro, then we don't become a democratic government at all. You know, people that fought in the Franco fight against fascism in the 30s, when they went back to America, They was told they was premature anti-fascist fighters. I'll ask you the question, brothers and sisters. Don't be premature anti-European fighters either. The reality is that the Viking case, the Laval, and all of the other rotten decisions that are coming out are anti-working class. She said yesterday, the European TUC General Secretary, she weren't a fan of football. She must have been a friend of the president of this TUC, because he knows not a lot about football with the team that he goes to. But what she said yesterday was, she knows what a yellow card is. Well, I know what a yellow card is. A yellow card is that you can carry on playing. Brothers and sisters, I'm finishing you. I'm asking you to support this resolution and vote for workers who have the right to have a referendum. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
President, delegates, Ronnie Draper, BFAWU. Comrades, I think this motion is one of the most fundamental ones on the agenda and most fundamental for our movement. Millions of workers who are still reeling from the last Tory government and the legislation that they put forward, asking now for the repeal of anti-trade union laws. We shouldn't have to be asking for the repeal of anti-trade union laws. The last Labour government should have given us that as a right. In the food industry, my members are already facing employers who are trying to return third will conditions on them, and if they can get backing from York, that they will. If we're to get to a stage where we're to take industrial action, we already have to jump through hoops. The last thing that we want is to have to fight against European bureaucracy. We have so little influence over UK employment legislation and the direction it's attacked. Will rallies like the 20th of October become a disproportionate response to government policy? Will meetings and gatherings like this become disproportionate as a collective response to government and industry attacks? We have to collectively say no. If it's so-called democracy, I have the opportunity to remove those who are my oppressors. In the instance of Court of Justice rulings, I have no say whatsoever. If we're to be faced with such dangerous legislation, we should have the right to oppose. We're not anti-Europe, but if faceless judges can have a detrimental effect on our trade unions, then we should at least be able to ask the question. Comrades, we should not stand idly by and allow our members to be attacked from all sides. There's already going to be a referendum, so we say that we should be at the beginning, driving the bus, shaping the future. Let's not wait until the questions are posed for us and then have to respond to them. Let's be at the beginning, shaping the future. Thank you, comrades, I say.
Thank you.
Elaine Jones, Unite, speaking against motion 77. Conference, the attitude we take to Europe now is extremely important again. And the reason it's important is that the working class are being made to pay for the crisis of capitalism. The ruling class across Europe say there's no choice, that they've got to make these cuts, but they get richer and their wealth increases. Our response to those attacks should be to strengthen our links with other European workers and trade unions and develop a European-wide working class alternative to austerity. A campaign now to withdraw from Europe would not help us develop those European-wide workers' links. They're not content with a one-day strike and a demo 10 months later. There have been protests and strikes. Doctors are now occupying hospitals, shipyard workers are blocking the streets over pay. I've spoken to comrades who went on a union delegation to Greece earlier this year. They met with health workers, transport workers, teachers, factory workers, and not one of those unions were calling for withdrawal. They say they will not make cuts if they're ordered to by the institutions of Europe and the IMF, but nor will they voluntarily leave Europe or the euro. A withdrawal campaign now from Europe would at best be a diversion for our movement against us making those European-wide links. At worst, it would infect our class with the poison of nationalism. We urge you to vote against motion 77.
RMC will have a right to reply if you want to come around there and save some time when it comes.
PCS also recognises, as we believe all of you do, that the EU is pro-austerity and pro-privatisation. PCS, like the whole of Congress, are united in opposing austerity and privatisation. But, and it's a big but, we do not share the conclusion that therefore we must campaign for withdrawal from the European Union. Congress, we reach that conclusion for two reasons. Firstly, because we believe it would be a massive distraction from the real and immediate fights we face. The fights against employers suppressing wages, the fights against employers cutting pensions and jobs, and the fights against the government privatising and cutting services. To embark on a campaign to withdraw from the EU would not only be a distraction from those fights, it would actually align us with the Tory right, with UKIP and with elements of big business, the very people who are calling for further reductions in workers' rights. Instead of defeating those reactionaries, we'd be sharing platforms with them. Congress, let's fight those real enemies, not make sham common cause with them. Secondly, we oppose this motion because we do not believe that leaving the EU would make workers and our communities better off. The EU is pro-austerity and pro-privatisation. All three major political parties supported austerity and supported privatisation. If you want a campaign to fight and win, then let's fight and campaign to make Labour anti-austerity and anti-privatisation. That's a fight worth having and one worth winning. The major trade unions and major left parties in Greece and Spain, hammered by austerity, are not making the demand for EU withdrawal and even for pulling out of the euro, because in itself it would do nothing to benefit workers. Pulling out of the EU would not overthrow capitalism.
Chair, conference on behalf of the General Council to invite you to reject this motion 77. There's a lot of good stuff in the motion about Monty II and trade union rights in Europe, but that's all in motion 78, which we're going to invite you to support the motion. Let me just say something also about the referendum. Today is the 11th of September. The fact that the Morning Star says today is the 11th of September and the Daily Mail says today of the 11th of September doesn't make it less true. So the point about the referendum, the fact that, if you like, your enemies support something that you think is right, doesn't in terms of the referendum. But in terms of what the position of the TUC is, we've not supported a call for Europe for the past over 20 years for two main reasons. First, it's unclear, to say the least, what the alternative is to the membership of the European Union would be. Closer links with the USA, is that being proposed, or with the Commonwealth, seem to be unpalatable, that's certainly unrealistic. So then maybe there's the Norwegian route, meaning that we still have to follow EU decisions without having any say in saying it. Secondly, the TUC has taken the view for 2 decades that on balance, EU membership of the EU is beneficial to both workers' interests, both in economic terms and in terms of workers' rights. And in terms of privatisation, it wasn't the EU, but it isn't been as a result of the EU that privatisation of the post office has been mooted, or the liberalisation of postal services, or for that matter, the anti-trade union laws. In terms of the referendum and the timing of any referendum, it would be completely the wrong thing to do now. Earlier this year, there was a vote in the House of Commons where 100 of Cameron's MPs voted to have a referendum. And when the government minister, it was about March earlier this year, and when the government minister was asked, well, if not now, how do we deal with some of the problems of the European Union? And he was asked on Newsnight, he said, what bit of the legislation, he said, we're not for a referendum now, but we'd like to repatriate some powers. And what were the powers he hit on right away? Employment rights. The first thing he said, in fact the only thing he said about repatriating powers, so it would be absolutely the wrong thing to do now. You heard Bernadette yesterday speak about helping the EU campaign in terms of social justice, jobs and growth. Our union supports a campaign for the repeal of all anti-trade union laws, but I think it's a bit of a myth to simply suggest that workers don't take strike action simply because of anti-trade unions. People don't take strike action because they're scared. But when the timing is right, and when they're quite prepared to defy anti-trade union laws, not because of what Europe says or this or that law. This week, in Crosby and Liverpool, our members went out because of the way they were treated. Not one of them cited the Viking Laval case. Not one of them cited the employment rights in this country. Workers struggle and fight when they're given hope. And you're not giving hope to workers, and you're not building the confidence of workers to suggest the simple root of your problem all lies in Brussels. The problem lies with the type of society that we're in, and the danger with the resolution suggests that if we had a referendum, that all our problems would be away in a referendum. Our problems are the type of world that we live in, and that's why we're asking conference to reject motion 77 and support motion 78. Thank you.
Reply to the RMC.
Thank you, President. Comrades, to my good friend Billy. Billy, when you said about your members going out and striking, I think it's Crosby up in Liverpool, they will get the support of your union and the full support of my union, and no doubt the full support of this TUC. But the reality is, Bill, your union's in court just as much often as our union's in court. And all I know is that when John Henry comes over and sees us and our solicitors, all I see from the other side, the bosses, is that they're taking us to court because of issues regarding Europe. They're the ones who mentioned Laval and Viking. And basically, to our comrades in the PCS as well, and same as Billy, the issue's pretty clear, brothers and sisters. Either you think you can reform the European Union, or if you can't reform the European Union, what are you going to do about it? Because if a service goes from one country to another, then proportionality can be used. And that means that your members in a democratic ballot can decide it wants to defend its industry, defend its members, and a judge can come along and say, I don't think what you're doing by taking a one-day strike action is too much, and you should only have an overtime ban, or you should have half a day strike, or whatever. That's what proportionality means under Monty 2. And our sister from Unite, well, I mean, she's saying that all the workers in Europe will rise together because there's a bureaucracy in Europe. That's not the case at all. Why aren't all workers rising in Europe all together? Workers will rise, as Billy quite rightly says, when there's a confidence. I just heard a speaker from Colombia yesterday. We've got speakers here from America and all over the world. I've got more in common with a Chinese labourer than I have a City of London stockbroker. And the issue is this, brothers and sisters. I thought we was internationalists. Why have we got to have a fortress of Europe round us? Why can't we go out into the world and be real internationalists? Of course there'd be problems. I'm not saying under capital, that capital would end. But I'll tell you, brothers and sisters, is anyone going to say to me now, if I was given the opportunity to, that you would go into the euro? Would anyone go into the euro at this present stage? No one in their right mind would go into the euro. The fact is the European Union is on its knees, and there will be a referendum. And if we don't put our agenda down, then the right wing will. Yes, we're in a minority today, but I've been a minority all my life. And I'll tell you something, I've always found out that 20 years later, being in the minority was the majority position that was absolutely right, which we obtained. So we might have been a minority, but I remember other positions this TUC took. And at the end of the day, we look back and say who was right and who was wrong. And I'll warn you, brothers and sisters, unless this movement wakes up, then you're going to face the debacle of the same problems that's happening in Greece, Portugal, Spain and Ireland. And I urge you to support the resolution.
All those that are in favour of the resolution from the RMT, seconded by BFAW, please show by putting your hand. All those against the motion? I think that's lost.
Thank you, President. Congress, Steve Gillen, POA, moving motion 5,
resisting austerity measures. Congress, the POA recognise this has caused some division. We don't believe it should. That's not our intent in this motion, and it's certainly not the POA trying to be smart or divisive in any way, shape or form. But what we truly believe is that there needs to be a robust response to this uncaring government, because if there isn't, then I think the trade union movement could be in trouble. The POA welcomed the Future That Works demonstration on the 20th of October. That's building on the march last year. It's building on the public sector strikes of the 30th of November and the 10th of May this year. Trade unions need to be the strong voice to protect not only public and private sector workers, but those who have no one speaking for them, such as the unemployed, our children, the elderly, disabled, and all those in our society who are vulnerable. We believe that Motion 5 supplements Composite 1 that was heard yesterday. We heard yesterday and we passed resolutions that coordinated campaigns and coordinated actions and strikes, and the POA believe they are fully justified in the wake of the resisting austerity measures and the attacks on pensions, pay and terms and conditions. We also believe we should consider the practicalities of a general strike. And the last time I looked in the dictionary, consider meant contemplate, think about, examine and reflect. If this motion is passed today, it doesn't mean that we're on a general strike tomorrow. It doesn't mean that whatsoever. But we should have that in our armoury, because this government aren't afraid or embarrassed to do what they're doing to society. So let's have a look. We had various speakers on Composite 1. So let's look at some of the reasons. Dave Prentice, Len McCluskey and Mark Sawatka elegantly outlined the position. Let's look at some of these issues, and they're not exhaustive. Job losses, public and private sector workers, child poverty, food banks, people going to loan sharks because they can't get to the end of the month, the Beecroft report, the anti-union laws, the Jackson report, 0 hours contracts, dismantling the welfare state, pay freezes, dismantling our NHS, dismantling all our public services, attacking unemployment, youth unemployment, and at the same time moving a pension age to 68. Well, I'm no economist, but the reality is, how on earth can you expect people to work to 68 years of age when you've got 1 million youngsters unemployed? It makes no economic sense whatsoever. But you know, we're at a crossroads. We need to make up our minds which direction we're going in. We should not be afraid to mention the words general strike, to say that we are going to consider that. People tell me, I listened to Ed Bowles this morning when he says that will fall into the hands, strikes will fall into the hands of this coalition government because they will put in additional anti-trade union legislation. They've already done it. They've already done it. And they'll do it even more, even without this threat. So when you're threatened, threaten them back and let's have it in our armoury. And just winding up on this particular issue, there was one issue this morning. Mary Turner, what an inspiration. Maybe we should have more Mary Turners in the trade union movement, because without them, we're going to die on our feet. So be proud of Mary Turner. Let's keep fighting, and let's take this fight to the coalition government. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Bob Crow, National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers. With a pleasure to second this resolution. I understand some of the debate's going to be about the word and the practicalities. Well, we can all argue about what words mean. You can extract the passage from Alice in Wonderland. Words will mean exactly what they want them to mean. And I'll tell you what the words I want them to mean. And I'm dealing from the top of the pack, not from the bottom of the pack. I don't want anybody accusing me of coming up here and trying to argue and get something through the back door. Every single person here today is representing someone that's under attack by this rotten government. Every single one of us. And I'll tell you what, I was astonished this morning when the attacks are taking place on workers next year on the industrial tribunals where the fees have been put up. Ed Balls never said a word. Not a single word. But what did he say? He said, you can't wait for a Labour government. We've got to do something now. Yes, we can carry on protesting. We can carry on doing that to raise the consciousness. But what else are we going to do? Have an organised street through London? Have the new General Secretary come through like Bonacea and nothing on a launch to say that we don't want these attacks to take place? If they're throwing spears at us from every part of the government, then the only option to do is to put every shield up to defend ourselves and defend our members. And the issue is this, brothers and sisters. After what Ed Balls said, it's no good people here saying that we've got to wait for a Labour government. I listened to his speech today, never heard him say once on the repeal of the anti-trade union laws, not once that he was going to do something to repeal the industrial tribunal fees. I had to take a 2 paracetamol and lay down in the dark room lunchtime after I heard what he said. Brothers and sisters, this is the unfairness. This government's spent £325 billion in quantitative easing, glorified IOUs. Why can't people who are losing their houses every day of the week have the right to have money lent from the government? Why can't small businesses have government money? Why can't these 100 million building workers that are on the dole with a shortage of housing? We should turn around and put the builders back to build houses, put people in the houses. They won't be paying tax anymore. It's paying tax and they'll be extracting social security rather. Brothers and sisters, we as the trade union movement have got to stand firm. We're the leadership. And this gives us an opportunity to reaffirm our belief, reaffirm our faith for what we stand in. Pass this resolution, get out on the demo on October the 20th and coordinate action. And if it means a general strike, let's do it and get on with it.
PCS, it's very welcome that the General Council is supporting this motion, so we should be clear what it means and how it can be implemented. The motion calls for coordinated action and far-reaching campaigns, including considering the practicalities of a general strike against government's austerity programme. This motion deserves the full, unqualified support of every union serious about defending its members and their class. Because austerity is just a sanitised expression for what is in reality nothing more than an unremitting class war carried out by this government against our people. And the aim is to achieve, on the basis of the cuts and privatisation programme, the biggest transfer of wealth and power in many generations. And at its core is a race to the bottom that is ripping the heart out of our communities. It means the driving down of wages, massive job cuts, the destruction of the welfare state, the NHS and the public services that provide the basis of a civilised existence for working people. This unprecedented assault, however, can only proceed because of the poisonous political consensus that exists amongst the major political parties, shamefully including Labour, that says there's no alternative to market, and the barbaric proposition that the acquisition of obscene wealth and profit by a tiny unaccountable elite comes before the needs of millions. But those millions are crying out for an alternative. They watch in fear and disgust as one outrage follows the other. The fixing of the LIBOR rates affecting millions, banks laundering drug money, and a government-instigated hate campaign against the disabled and unemployed. The 30th of November demonstrated the massive strength and potential of our movement. But rather than building on that tremendous display of class solidarity, the abject surrender that followed sent out a message of division, despair and defeatism. We now have an opportunity to send out a message of hope, loud and clear, that we intend to harness the full strength of our movement and class to stop this austerity programme in its tracks. October the 20th must be more than another protest march. It must be the platform on which we build coordinated industrial action on the widest possible front across both the public and private sector. Every union here has a legitimate dispute on pay, pensions, jobs, privatisation or a late edition. So let's have no nonsense about the difficulties or the legalities of organising coordinated action. And let's not fixate on the scary words general strike. Let us rather, in a determined, committed and most crucially urgent fashion, sit down together and agree a date for joint industrial action across the trade union movement as soon as practically possible after October the 20th. A 24-hour general strike is a start to an effective programme of coordinated industrial action, and wider campaigning would irrevocably shift the balance of power in our favour. How many times does it have to be said? Campaigning works and action gets results. We have recently won thousands of jobs and PCS and civil service by organising action. The attacks are increasing, they're not abating. Millions are waiting for a lead. Let's give them that lead. Support the motion.
TUC, just a gentle reminder, the red light doesn't mean you've got another minute.
President Congress, Tony Cairns, communication workers to support motion 5. I just want to make this point, when the BOA last proposed this, the CW opposed it, but a lot's happened between that and today. And what you're going to get told, no doubt, by those who oppose this, is that this is fantasy politics and we shouldn't be indulging. Fantasy politics to me is a group of millionaires meeting in Oxford 10, 15 years ago and praying that there's some kind of banking and economic crisis around the world that they can then step in and use to drive their ideology and drive the working class into abject poverty for generation after generation, because that's the society we're heading towards if we stand back and do nothing about what's going on to our members and the working class today. As Steve says, it doesn't mean there's going to be a general strike tomorrow, and I agree. It doesn't mean, because the CDU stands up here and supports this, that if we went back on Thursday morning and called our members out, they're going to come out? No, they're not. No, of course they're not. But one of the issues about discussing the practicalities is understanding all the barriers that might be in the way to generating that type of action. And one of the barriers that's going to be in the way is engaging with the membership. And we have to go out and explain in detail the issues that affect our members on a day-to-day basis, and how that's going to shape society for years to come. And one of the other hurdles that's going to be put in your way when you're asked to oppose this is that actually what we should be doing should be keeping our heads down, letting it ride over, and it'll go away. Well, nobody was keeping, people were keeping their heads down when the attacks came on pensions. People were keeping, benefit recipients were keeping their heads down when there was an attack on a welfare state. Cancer victims, when their care was taken away. A 40% increase in rough sleepers on the streets of this country in the last 12 months alone. Homeless people keeping their heads down and yet still being picked on. Children's education. Remember children making threats to the government when their education and their futures were taken away. And this is the type of society that we're going towards. One of the other reasons the CW supports this actually is because it's CW conference policy, carried out our conference in 2011, unanimously, I have to say, with a call that says to call on the TUC to coordinate a 24-hour general strike. No, it's not going to happen just because we say so, and it's not going to happen just because we click our fingers, but the practicalities are we have to point point out to our members the type of society they're going to be living in the future, and we're the ones who are leading this movement today, have to take that responsibility and say enough is enough, and the fight back has to begin here with this motion.
Thank you very much. Prospect, and then the NAS UWT.
President Congress Paul Noon from Prospect speaking in opposition to motion 5, and specifically the demand for consideration of the TUC call for a general strike. And I agree with Steve Gillen absolutely that the present situation requires a robust response from the trade union movement. And our view is that this is what it got in our consideration of Composite 1. And at the very best, this motion is a distraction. The distraction of the great work that we're doing together in the Future That Works campaign as set out in Composite 1, and a distraction from winning the arguments, which we are doing, that you can't cut your way to growth. We don't think that contemplation of a general strike reflects the reality of where we are, certainly not where Prospect is as a trade union, or we believe where we are as a movement. That's not to say that we won't support industrial action where appropriate and where we have a legitimate trade dispute. We're not ducking the question of strike action. As Mike Clancy made clear from us yesterday, Prospect will do this if necessary on pay, and will coordinate with other unions as we did on the 30th of November. This was all covered in Composite 12 yesterday. We're not going to pretend we're anywhere near a generalised public sector and private sector strike call when there are profound doubts about whether a legitimate trade dispute actually exists. And far from making our enemies and opponents tremble in their shoes, a call like this will, in our view, be seen by them as a stick to beat us, a welcome distraction and diversion from their failings. Finally, would a general strike work even if we could do it? Well, it didn't work out too well for us last time, did it? Let's not pretend that we can do something we can't. We'll vote against motion 5, and I hope you do too. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. NAS UWT, then I'll be calling BALPA, followed by Unite, USDOR and ATL.
President Congress, Chris Keats, NAS UWT, speaking in opposition to motion 5. All of us here know that since May 2010, ordinary working people and families have faced a sustained, vicious and relentless assault on their standards of living, on their jobs, on their pay, on their pensions, on their working conditions and access to key services, including free healthcare and education. The TUC has led the trade union and public fight back against the ideologically driven policies which drip with contempt for working people, public services, and indeed anything which is the mark of a fair and a just society. The NASUWT, like other unions here, has played and continues to play a key role in this fight back. Our members are taking action day after day on a school-by-school basis to combat academisation and privatisation. On a school-by-school basis, we are taking action against job loss. On a national basis, coordinated across 24,000 schools, we've been engaged since the 1st of December 2011, every single day, in continuous industrial action. And yesterday, we announced the escalation of this to take place later this month in conjunction with our sister union, the NUT. Yesterday, Congress voted unanimously to support coordinated industrial action as part of our Future That Works campaign. We know that we can deliver coordinated action. We did it on the 30th of November. But this motion, whatever words we use, consideration, practicalities, will be seen as a motion calling for a general strike. And as a result, we risk alienating the public, but more importantly, we risk handing this unelected coalition the propaganda it needs to deflect the growing public anger that is developing against this government onto the working people we represent. Our hearts, our anger, our frustration, our passionate and unstinting commitment to working people and trade union values drives us to want to instinctively vote for a motion containing reference to a general strike. But colleagues, it's our heads that must win the day. Let's not convince ourselves that talking about or calling a general strike is a magic bullet against this government and will end this nightmare. What we need is digging in, building the strategy we established on November the 30th, stepping up the information and the awareness campaign, doggedly challenging everything they do, mounting defences in every workplace, and building the industrial action. Use our heads as we've done so far. Let's build for sustained and coordinated action, and we will win on behalf of the working people and ordinary families in this country. I urge you to oppose the motion.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you, President. Jim McCausland on behalf of the British Airline pilots to oppose motion 5. Very clear. Pass this, not in our name. We are told in the corridors and the huddles that go on at Congress that there's nothing to be worried about. It's only to consider the practicalities. That is just wrong. If you don't believe me, POA, listen to the seconder. The only words that matter in this motion are the last two. And yes, I'm fixated about the last two. Those are the words that this motion is about. Pass this and you let the genie out the bottle. And I can tell you about the practicalities now. 15% of workers in the private sector belong to a trade union. The average turnout in a ballot in the public sector is 20%. That means that about 3%, if we are lucky, of private sector workers will take part in a ballot. Even if we can find a unifying industrial issue in my own industry, in the 26 disparate bargaining areas that I represent, that would make them lawful. The reality is, in my own association, 80% of whom belong to a union, and we're not against having a ROC, is that this would be seen as not just a general strike, not a general strike at all. It would be seen as a public sector strike. Rather than a display of strength, it would actually expose a weakness and a deep fault line that exists between us. Just at a time, as the last speaker said, and we should be describing a broad economic alternative to what we're faced with that reaches every corner of this nation's life, we get tied in knots about a day's general strike that won't work. It will not work. Worse, it will give our opponents a stick to beat us with about a whole range of industrial action ballot law. Just at a time when our message should be about unfairness of work, about gaps in agency workers' directive, about weakening employment laws, things that do unite us, we devote time, effort and energy to this and give the leader writers and the commentators of this land a chance to divide us. Congress is a time for the power of argument. This is the time. And there's a time for the argument of power. This is not the time. Oppose.
Afternoon, Congress. President Steve Turner, Unite, proudly speaking in support of Motion 5. Colleagues, we've had 2 days of fantastic debate here in Brighton, and it's clear to all that we are without doubt not simply in uncharted waters here, but facing a vicious and vindictive government that's comfortable in not only treating ordinary, decent people with contempt, but waging open class war on our members, on our communities, and if we don't stop running, the one body that can effectively organise a fight back, and that's us. In response, I'm not standing here demanding that the TUC gets off its knees. This is a serious debate and raises critically important issues for the future of our movement. But Lem was right on Monday when he said you can't deal with these challenges with leaflets. Equally, we won't win with argument alone. And Brenda later spoke of it being a defining moment for our movement. And he's right. And in response to this moment, Motion 5 calls upon the General Council to do a number of things, including the consideration and practicalities of organising a general strike. And given we only have a limited number of weapons in our collective class armoury, it would be a betrayal of our responsibilities as leaders of our movement if we did anything less. It does not, colleagues, call for a general strike. And colleagues, in considering our options, it must be clear that any such action would be a political strike. called centrally by the TUC, and not a trade dispute requiring ballots or majorities. And of course, yes, we will face many challenges. Legal challenges, political challenges and logistical challenges. It would help if we were growing, had 10 million members and not 6 million members. But most importantly, it's an issue of confidence and solidarity. Passing a motion's easy. Considering the issues will be a little more difficult. But to see that policy into practice needs support, action and argument in thousands of workplaces across our nation. Arguing the case for action with millions of ordinary workers, private and public sector, men and women, linking the generations, those in work, those without work, our workplaces with our wider communities, developing solidarity and a collective confidence to rise up. But Congress, remember this, our challenges pale into insignificance when compared with those faced every day by millions of ordinary people in this country. Pay cuts and growing insecurity at work, the class cleansing now of our inner cities, the infliction of poverty on families in a scale not seen since the 1930s, the dehumanising effect of unemployment and 1 million betrayed youth, attacks, welfare attacks, moving people on a path from workfare to the workhouse, and the destruction of our health, education and public services. And I will finish here, Chair. We're at our best united, proud and fighting back, roaring like lions, not cowering in corners. Doing nothing's not an option. What we do, and our best we do it, is a long overdue debate. Support motion 5.
Then recap, and then outdoor, and then we'll go to the vote. Sorry, right, that's live, Steve.
Colleagues, ACL opposes this motion not because we do not believe that this coalition government is following a catastrophic course, failing in its duty of care to the poor, the vulnerable, the young, the sick and the disabled. We oppose this motion because in our view, ATL's view, the call for a consideration of a general strike is a dangerously misguided strategy. It's the wrong thing to do at this time. Osborne got booed at the Paralympics because the public now get it. Just like the Bank of England, the IMF and the OECD. His plan A for austerity is not working and will not work. So the coalition is in crisis and the media are reflecting that. The TUC can be proud of the part it has played in making the argument against austerity politics and the part it has highlighted in the alternatives to austerity. That is what the march on the 20th of October should do more of. But now, just as we are being listened to by the public, we change the message. The proposers of this motion make a gift to the right-wing editors who can resume normal service with the big lie, it's the union's fault. And by the way, if you think they will bother about the neat distinction between calling a general strike and considering calling a general strike, you're less cynical than I hope you are. But I say this, even the least cynical amongst you know that this government is under the sway of the most ruthless and right-wing ideologues seen in Westminster for many, many years. This motion is a welcome gift to them, itching as they are to take off the shelf of the package of further legal restrictions on trade unions. And if you're relying on a Labour government to take those restrictions away, well, look what they did in the last time in power. Let me pass over the little practical difficulties of coordinating lawful trade disputes with thousands of employers across the country, or of activating the 14% of our members in the private sector, because I want to end with this question. I know what the appetite for strike action is amongst the membership of ATL, and this is why I'm speaking here today. I cannot claim to know the appetite amongst 6 million of our members as a whole. Are they ready, or do they need a further campaign of education of working people to convince them that now is the moment they must stand up for themselves or face a lengthy period of intensified exploitation? I only ask that you answer that question for yourselves honestly before you vote.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me in. Chris Murphy, UK. And I'm going to give you an history lesson, because this is my last TUC, not me first as a delegate for UK. The reason I got a cocky accent is because my father was a miner, and in 1926 we had the same debate then, and he had to come to London to get a job, and when he got to London he was treated like black people were treated when they come over in the 50s. The point I'm making is we've had this debate time and time again about general strikes. We framed the general strike for the Pentonville 5. Framed. The Pentonville 5 were there. The miners, whether you agree that the miners should have had a national ballot or not, they took action to defend their villages, their industry. Look what's happened to the mining communities. And one reason for that is the TUC members bowled it. This resolution is just asking to consider, look in the light, sorry, a general strike, but the way the opposition is, you think we're calling a general strike for the 20th of October instead of a demonstration. If you go down the road of opposing this resolution, I think it'll prove to the membership and potential members of trade unions and the youngsters that there's no fight. Look at Europe. Look at Europe. In Spain, and I'm no expert, but what I read in the newspapers is they're out in the streets, they're going into supermarkets, they're taking the food out because they haven't got jobs. Right. Sorry, Chair, I beg you, don't make the mistake we made year after year after year when we're faced with a crucial issue. This government is worse than Thatcher was, and we can't show them they can't get away with attacking the workers' class of this country. So support
Chris, if you can't get away with taking the liberty with the chair, nobody can. Thank you, mate.
Thank you very much.
Final speaker, Oscorp, and then I'll call POA for the right of reply. All right, Steve. Thank you.
Congress, John Hannah Dusdall, speaking in opposition to motion 5
And Congress, I listen patiently to the Speaker's report. Please accord me the same dignity. Congress, what does unify us in this debate is the anger, the frustration, the effect and the determination of a government to attack workers. What divides us in this conversation and this debate is the strategy. And therefore, whatever strategy you support, the respect of each other's opinion is important. Congress, I listened very carefully to the speakers. First of all, I'm absolutely clear that much of the motion reiterates the sentiments contained in Composite Motion 1, which was carried unanimously yesterday. But the issue with this motion is in effect the sting in the tail. And Congress, I've been around the trade union movement a long time. I'm not going to challenge Steve in terms of what his intention is, but I know this. This form of words is in effect a means to an end. In reality, it would have been more open if somebody had moved the motion to call for a general strike. If they hadn't done, I believe it would have been defeated. Congress, be careful. I would ask the question of all General Secretaries and all leaders, whether it's politicians, how many letters are they getting from workers asking the TUC to organise and call a general strike? I believe that is not happening, and I think this is sometimes we reflect only really, we should reflect what our members want. Congress, I met with my delegation last night. We had a very open, transparent conversation about the likelihood, even if the conversation took place. And I can tell you, right now many of those members are as angry and frustrated as every other union who's contributed to this debate. But here's the rub, Conference. At the moment, they talk about strategy in terms of political activity, making sure we retain a government that is empathy with us, and not something that is not going to happen. Congress, I am absolutely clear. The work we've got to do begins not just in this hall, but in every workplace. But be frank about this. Let's not get ourselves into a position that what we're really talking about is a conversation. The real issue is that our people, who I respect their opinion, who would like a general strike, but my opinion, based on my evidence from my members, who are no different than any other union's members in this hall, is that's not what they want. And secondly, and most importantly, and it was said by Paul and a number of other speakers, let's not give our opponents the biggest stick ever to beat us with. Because when they start probing how many members are in the private sector, how many members are queuing up for a general strike, we will fall flat. And I can tell you, I am not in the business of saying something that might fall popularity. This is about real politics. This is about educating our membership about what's happening. But then remember, when it comes to the ballot box, changing the government, we work together. And that means not just passing a proposition as though it's a conversation. We know what the real agenda is. Some people believe passionately that is the answer. But I do not believe that reflects the mood of the country or the mood of many members who work in this employment. Conference has been a good debate. What should unify us is to change a government that constantly attacks us, not to get in a position that we believe something that's going to happen and won't. Thank you. Please oppose.
Thank you, John. Steve, I'm making the wild assumption you're going to exercise your right of reply.
I've exercised my right to reply, President. It's been a good debate, and I think it's been an honest debate, and that's what the trade union movement should be about. We should be able to come to the rostrum and say it as it is, and let's have that debate. There's no problem with that. As for giving our opponents an excuse to beat us with a big stick, I think they're already doing that, and it's starting to hurt. Unite were absolutely right about trade disputes and the differences of political protest called by the TUC. John Hendy and Professor Keith Ewing have been absolutely clear in a briefing that they have written that it is potentially legal. That is why we need to take responsibility and lead the trade union movement against this government. A couple of issues as well, and I just want to say, the POA, you know that we've been restricted of our trade union rights for the last 18 years. We've had magnificent support from Brendan and from Francis in disputes that we've had. And I've heard it said in some corridors, it should be said at the rostrum, that the POA are moving this motion to get the rest of you on a general strike. That is not true. The integrity of my union is beyond reproach. The reality is we have broken the anti-trade union legislations and we've led on that ourselves. It's all too easy to look for excuses why we shouldn't do things. But we are the leadership, as I said, in moving the motion, and we shouldn't be afraid to take the fight to this coalition government. Yes, still threaten us. But I tell you now, and I see the red light, Chair, and I will now go. This government will only stop chasing us when we stop running.
Thank you, Steve. Actually, it was only the amber light, but thank you anyway. I'm going to now move to the vote on motion 5. All those in favour of the motion, please show. Yes. Thank you. All those against? That's carried.